Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another super special bonus live episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast here at South by Southwest EDU in Austin. We're about halfway through all of our amazing interviews that we've lined up, getting to the tail end of day 2 here on Tuesday. So, excited to have somebody back. Actually, they were on the podcast many years ago. We'll definitely link out to that episode if folks want to, have a little flashback. But Angelique from the Native Forward Scholars Fund. It was great talking to you. We've kind of kept in touch. I feel like followed your all's work on LinkedIn and stuff. So great to have you back. But just as kind of a reintroduction, it's been long enough. I feel like to kind of start fresh here. Briefly introduce yourself and your background, and then we'll just get more into the conversation of kind of your work and the context that's happening in right now and all that good stuff. So
sure. Well, thank you for having me here. My name is Angelique Albert. I'm the CEO of Native Forward Scholars Fund. I am a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes from Northwest Montana, a mom of 3 boys, a grandmother of 2 grandboys, all boys. But I've been the CEO of Native Forward for 9 years and just am just as passionate today as I was the day I started. So lots of work to do in the space for Native Forward Scholars Fund. For those who don't know, we are the largest direct scholarship provider to Native students in the country. We give away between $13 and $15 million in scholarships annually and fund students from all tribes, all 50 states for any degrees, as long as they're going to an accredited institution. So it is our mission to make sure that we can fulfill the unmet need of those students who are out there trying to go to college. So that's kind of a little bit about what we do.
Yeah, and you all have been looking in kind of with your website and the history and the timeline. I mean, you've been around for decades, doing this work and everything. It's just really impressive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But before we get too far, you all being here at South by EDU, what brings you all here? How are you all engaging? Anything that you're kind of just hearing, seeing that you feel like is noteworthy so far at the event this year?
Oh, gosh. Well, for us, it's important to always be present and visible as Native people. I think that's one of the challenges that we have is finding spaces for us to use our voice. And so for us, we were here to do a panel on reclaiming truth from erasure to Native leadership. So that's our participation, but it's really been nice to connect with people who are helping us to gain exposure, potential funders. And so it's been a great time.
Yeah, I think it is just so valuable, this space, this community where you can do a lot of awareness building, and kind of advocacy and just the networking and kind of, maybe just learning approaches maybe from other similar organizations that are doing, work kind of in their own lanes. But and I think, to kind of segue back to, talking more about your work, a big part of it, is the scholarships and stuff, but kind of doing the research where there's a lot of resources that you're not just sort of dumping money in people's laps and be all right, good luck, have fun, because I think that's kind of would be the worry of work like this would be that some organization is just sort of doling out scholarships and it's up to the students to still just navigate a lot of the complexity of higher ed and life challenges of whatever else. So talk a little bit more about the resources beyond the funding that you provide to the scholars that you work with.
We've been doing the work for over 55 years now, and for the past 30, we've been able to refine a very tailored, specific, wraparound service type program that is high touch. We have staff who are dedicated to helping students. We reach out to them. We check in on them to see how they're doing academically. We connect them to resources on campus and help them navigate any challenges that they have on campuses. It's pretty shocking sometimes that one call to a financial aid department and helping them navigate a funding issue can help retain them in school. But back to the program that we've established, that's really kind of our secret sauce, and why we have graduation rates that are about 30% higher than the national average for Native scholars. So our undergraduate graduation rate is 69%, and then our graduate percentage is 95%. So those are pretty high, and we attribute that to having staff who help them navigate things that they don't know. I was a first-generation college-going student. I didn't know how to get into grad school. I didn't know about the GMAT. There's so much that I was not aware of. So it's important that we have staff on hand to help them navigate those kind of circumstances and other things that come up. And if, just having someone to reach out to, or in our case, reaching out to them, has been really instrumental in our success and helping them to persist. So the number one barrier still is the financial barriers. And even though we are able to help them, we are not able to fully fund their unmet need. Our average scholarship is about $11,000, and the average unmet need is $26,000. And the cost of education continues to kind of climb. So we do our best to support them, but it does take the scholarship dollars first, and then those support services second. And then we also have incorporated other programming such as mentoring. So we have 22,000 scholars across the United States in law, education, you name it, business, and so connecting them to professionals in the field is also helpful for them to go on to their career choices. So we have other programming and training that we offer them, but the kind of core piece is the scholarships and then those wraparound services.
Yeah, and I've spoken to some other folks that do kind of similar work with kind of all that you said of like that kind of like continuity of support, like that idea that like a student, that is a scholar with you all, like knows that they can always go to you all, like, and that kind of guiding them through. Cause I think there's just sometimes like a lot of like hands-on support from an institution in like the first year, but then it kind of drops off, or like, things kind of are always shifting in the way that you maybe are getting support. And then like at best you have a lot of support, but it's ambiguous. You don't know, who or where, to go to for certain things. And I feel like there is just sort of a chronically low awareness of the, various student engagement and support resources at institutions, or just a lack of capacity and that sort of thing. So it's, great to be able to have like continuity of support and like, kind of across the board, and, stuff like the mentoring and kind of like career exploration and everything. But, yeah, I think, I was sort of curious, thinking back, we, recorded many years ago, and now with a lot of, kind of hindsight and everything, I'm curious, with all that you kind of explained, like how has or hasn't your work changed since the pandemic?
Oh my gosh, it has changed quite a bit. I will say, during the pandemic, we had to pivot and make sure that we were providing emergency resources for students, but something that is really heavy on my heart right now is the fact that we, in tribal higher education, we're kind of in crisis, because since 2010, our numbers are declining at a rate that is just astronomical. The college attendance for Native students has declined by 45%. That is not anywhere close to anyone else. Like historically, we've always been the most underrepresented group in higher education, but what has happened in the years from 2010 to the 2023, that's a 13-year period, to have a 45% decline in Native college attendance. I think there's many factors that can contribute to that, but that number is so big and so concerning that we need to really start looking into that and looking into what can we do. Like, we know that the cost of attendance is kind of the biggest issue, but there isn't any research out there, what is going on, and what we've seen in most recent years is the transition, or some of the policies that are coming out from the current administration are significantly impacting our Native scholars, even though as Native people, we're citizens of sovereign nations and we have a unique political classification. So we technically don't fit into DEI, but we receive funding through some of those same funding sources. So we have seen the resources on campuses declining for our students, and our numbers have increased significantly. So to give you an idea, we funded 2,000 students this year, which is 400 more than last year. So we thought we were doing great, but guess what? We turned away 5,000 students. So we only funded 2,000 out of 7,000. So we're still, and then the numbers that are coming in now, we have 12,000 applicants coming in right now. So at a time when there is a decline in overall college attendance, but the students who are in college are seeking out resources because their current resources are being impacted. And that can be, the support services on campus. So we're getting a lot more calls from students, and we're getting an increase in the applications. So the landscape has changed quite a bit. So we're having to navigate that.
Yeah, that's definitely, we'll stick here for a moment because I wanted to talk about sort of the turbulence of this past year and some of the changes and everything, how it's impacted your team's work and everything. So I think, some of the conversations we've had, I think we've reached kind of peak, student loan debt and just sort of kind of unfettered access to, certainly in the graduate space loans and, just a lot of kind of consternation, towards higher as part of pricing a lot of people out where, I think this moment culturally is going to be kind of partially really represented by accountability and affordability. There's kind of a reckoning coming for institutions to really address those things. And some of it is coming from federal policy to put things in place to be, having institutions be accountable and everything. Cause the worst situation obviously is somebody, does pursue higher education, pays that premium, but is getting really low outcomes, not, becoming gainfully employed or not able to kind of persist and succeed and graduate and all of that. So I think on the whole, it's good, but then the conversations that we're having are kind of you could have done it a little bit more, kind of smartly, I guess, in terms of how we enact good policy to achieve both of those things. Because that idea of students even kind of pursuing higher education in the first place, cost is going to be a major barrier, and that's coming, up in a lot of our conversations. So, that idea of in a perfect world, the amount that you're giving should cover all or the vast majority, of students pursuing, higher education at institutions, all across the country. But, it is just a tough moment. And I think, I guess just talking more about this current moment, because I think this may be just the first part to kind of make sure I'm kind of understanding correctly, sort of identifying Native students pursuing education at institutions all across the country, but also tribal colleges, their enrollments are decline. Is it both or either or in terms of the declines that you're seeing of those Native students studying anywhere, and then the tribal colleges within kind of the sovereign nations?
Yeah, I think that those numbers that I gave are overall in the country. I will say that, for us as Native people, education started with the boarding school era, and that was not that long ago. That was my mom's generation. So there has been at the same time such a large push by our ancestors and my predecessors to ensure that we have access to quality education. But I think the state of the higher education for Native people in general is in crisis, and we're seeing declines across the board. And what I would say is that to step up to that moment, we have had to take a serious look at, culturally, we try to fund for the next 7 generations. We want to make investments in endowments that will last for our children's children. And we've had to make some decisions to say, okay, well, maybe we will put 80% of these funds into an endowment, and we're going to take the other portion and spend it out immediately because we need to address some of these current issues that are being thrown their way. So the other thing that we've had to do internally is staff up, because it's not just the scholarship dollars. We're getting a lot of calls on how to navigate situations. And so we've had to staff up to be able to take the additional calls for students. But I think that it seems like there's not a lot of research. And as Native people, we typically people look at us as, our populations are low, so we're statistically insignificant. So it doesn't warrant, good research for data. But when the numbers are so high at 45% decline, it just over doubles any other demographic out there. So I think that it warrants kind of a deeper dive, and that's something that we are starting to look into.
We just did a recording, so it's fresh on my mind, talking about like student parent support, and that there's a lot of advocacy on that front, and some states being like, okay, we're going to like put money towards looking into sort of the scope of our population, how are the needs being met and not met, and those sort of things. So that idea of basing on a common foundation of data and not being kind of anecdotal about, one thing or another. But yeah, like putting resources towards that. And I think it is the way with like the student parents, the conversation went as like the acknowledgement of like, okay, this is sort of a grouping, such as like veteran students or whatever. You can kind of like, kind of encapsulate something and be like, we're leaving them behind, and there's going to be a major net gain and kind of net benefit, for us as a state, to make that investment, in these people to become gainfully employed and, be well supported as they're doing that. And, just having like a lot of kind of like, ripple effects in a positive way to do that. And I guess, yeah, just my mind kind of going to a similar place of just the need for acknowledgement of like, this is part of our community, our country that we've like, let down. Like it's kind of, get a scope of the problem and figure out, the ways that we can, address that. Cause it's like, just more people pursuing credentials and, post-secondary education and becoming, gainfully employed and sort of engaged citizens and like all these good sort of societal existential benefits. But then even just on the micro front, it just being obviously like hugely impactful for, those individuals, to get those credentials, have more options in terms of like pursuing their career goals and, whatever it might be, and just being able to like have a more durable, career. And so I guess it's just that idea of like, yeah, you can start to kind of plug into, tribal students and, understanding like, yeah, like where are they going? Why aren't they pursuing? Why are they dropping out? And just start to get those kind of clear data points and things. I think, it would be really powerful to just be able to like direct generally our efforts, whether it's yours and, you in partnership with particular states or institutions or whatever it might be. Yeah, it's like it starts from just that like common understanding.
Well, and when you're talking about where are they going, I think, well, first of all, looking at what is the landscape of native scholar right now. The native scholar is a non-traditional scholar who are making $35,000 a year and head a household and trying to hold down a house and trying to afford $26,000 for their unmet need beyond maybe the parent portion, right? So that's what it looks like for the average native student out there. But where are they going? I will say doing this 55 years, our organization, I'm not quite that old, but,
you look great, Yeah.
Thank you. I'm almost there. But just doing the work, we see what happens when you invest just such a small amount of money into phenomenal people who have always been disadvantaged. The laws of this country did not shift until 1975. Every federal Indian law prior to that was set out to exterminate us, to erase us, to terminate us, and boarding school era, assimilate us, right? So these were the policies pre-1975. Okay, I was born then. So this is not like historical. Mm-hmm. So it has only been since then. And you know what has happened? When you invest just a little bit of money into a native scholar who is passionate and driven to make sure that we have our sovereignty rights preserved, to make sure that we have PhD educating ourselves, what happens is you fund people like Deb Holland, who goes into the very institution that created the boarding schools and does a truth and reconciliation initiative and has recommendations come out of that and starts the healing process for this country. And we funded so many NARF lawyers. NARF is a Native American Rights Fund. And they have done initiatives that have helped to increase the number of cases that go before the Supreme Court. In 2001, the different cases that went before the Supreme Court we were losing 80% of them. And through this collaboration that they have with the National Congress of American Indians, who we've also funded people who are tribal leaders in that space, they've done a collaborative, and now we're winning 70% of those cases. So the power of voice and representation in spaces that matter is so critically important. And that's why, we may be talking about students and their current needs and this $11,000 scholarship or the $5,000 scholarship, but at the end of the day, it produces phenomenal people who are policy makers, who are out there doing entrepreneurship or making legislative, being the first Native in a cabinet position. And they're really changing the landscape of federal Indian policy in this country. And we see these scholars in various sectors and industries across the country really making things happen for us as Native people. So they are changing the landscape of the top two fields that we fund are law and PhD. And it speaks to the history that we've had with the boarding schools and the lack of self-governance pre-1975. Mm-hmm. So Native Forward's influence in that, the fact that we've funded over 2,000 tribal lawyers and over 2,200 PhDs, we have helped contribute to that story and changing the landscape and helping to change the laws so that they don't harm us anymore. And so I think it's important to not just say, yeah, here's the history, right? Here are our current challenges, but really understanding the power of education and what that does for communities who have been oppressed for so long.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing all that because, that's important context to acknowledge, and then even just sort of, capturing the impact and all that, because that's where my mind was going, the idea of like framing, in the grand scheme of things, a modest investment in helping someone, get a bachelor's degree, then like the generational kind of lifetime benefits, to them, to society, to the economy, and all that. Like, it's like the return on that, is huge, so it's that idea of trying to understand kind of what you're getting out of like, all the ways that you have seen the work, kind of planting these seeds and the amazing harvest that comes out, from all of that, of like the impacts to kind of, right all of these wrongs and, just do way more kind of impactful, policy making and advocacy and all those sort of things. But it's just sort of like investing whatever amount of money for them to go to the, school of their choice, and then, a lifetime of gainful employment, whatever. It's just like, let's just do the like equation and calculation of that. Uh-huh. And then it's like on top of that, the sort of like cherry on top is like, all the things that you were sort of capturing. So that's always, for me, it's kind of like, I could care less whatever way you get to it. If it's just sort of like the purely economic calculation of like, we spent this much money and then like they're gainfully employed and pay back taxes or whatever, like the economic, activity or whatever. It's like, fine, if that's how you have to do it. Like, but,
and we do have the economic impact study that we've done, and we do that every, 5 years or so. And the economic impact numbers are pretty significant as well. For every dollar invested, you get a 13 point some return on investment in that dollar. But then also we do capture the social impacts. So the decrease in the social expenditures, the increase in tax revenues. So we also have that available on our website. So you can see if you're a numbers person, which I kind of am, it's kind of good to look at that to say, okay, I am investing in Native. I personally invest because I believe in it, and I get a greater return than the stock market, right? And that doesn't count that transformative impact that we were talking about. There's always the quantitative and the qualitative, and so. But for me, it's more. The numbers are fun, but the lives changed, and then when you combine that with our cultural values, where we as Native people, we don't go out and get educated for ourselves so that we can have a credential on the wall. We go get educated because it's our responsibility to give back to our communities, to empower our communities, to strengthen our communities, whether that's serving in tribal leadership, whether that's starting a business and giving back to that economy, or whether it's going out and working for a nonprofit that funnels funds back into our tribal communities, right? It's about giving back and strengthening our tribal sovereignty and strengthening our people, supporting our people. So education is never about that, checkbox or me personally getting to that next level. It really is about supporting our tribes and our tribal communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's what you would hope is that, there's sort of this like virtuous cycle, of like folks that, benefit from pursuing, getting a bachelor's degree, then can like, that's what you like try to do in terms of like, on the individual, like institutional level of like engaging alumni to get them to give, donations or whatever. But like on a sort of more like societal level, understanding sort of like, okay, like you're in a place now to sort of be able to, give back and have an impact and, help others like you and that sort of thing. So it's, and I think, that being more embedded, certainly, culturally or historically for certain folks than others. But we'll have to wrap up though with our common question that we're asking everybody. You've shared just great perspectives and just passion for this topic, which I love. But with your unique vantage point, and working with the students and getting all this sort of like inputs and the things that they're kind of trying to work through and everything else, I'd hope maybe I guess you can give some advice for other higher ed leaders navigating this moment from your unique vantage point.
At a time of change and uncertainty that we're all going to, I think it's important that we also change. So I would encourage other educators, other partners, potential partners, look for the unlikely partners and let's lean in on those things and try to create a different framework. We can't do things the same as they were. As things change, we have to be willing to change and to come from a place, kind of a mindset of abundance and collaboration and kind of lean into each other, because at uncertain times, I think it's easy to lean towards fear and what do we do and anxiety. But at these times, I think there's opportunity for ally building in spaces where we might not have known. So I just encourage anyone that is inspired by us at Native Forward to connect with us and to partner with us and help lift each other up. So I think that's my advice is, how do we collaborate in ways that maybe we haven't thought of? And so that's the space I'm in right now. So I welcome anyone who wants to join me on that journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, ways to connect with you and Native Forward Scholars Fund in the episode description. And just always great talking to you about this important topic. And just thanks for taking some time out of the conference.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.